Hi, welcome back everyone with Peter Engel and Mihail Ju for another talk, part of the bigger series that you can find here, playlist Reigniting the Fragments of the Fourth Way. And today we'll just go into answering some questions that we received from some people interested in the work. Yeah, we haven't prepared our answers. We may have different answers. Hopefully it's helpful. So the first question, how can I go beyond the feeling of devotion to God and see it is a limiting I? How can I go beyond the feeling of devotion to God and see it is a limitation I or limiting I? Or the same person used this famous quote from Zen teachings saying, when you find the Buddha on your path, you must kill the Buddha, chop off his head, something like this. You must chop off his head and you must resume your own Buddha nature. So, Peter, would like to start with this?
First of all, as we were talking about right before this recording, I wasn't familiar with that expression, to kill the Buddha. That's interesting. And I remember, I think it's quite similar to Ramana Maharshi once said, the last illusion to go is about God, meaning that God is somewhere out there. God is another being separate from me. I aspire to God, but I must be devout to God. And it's this last illusion of duality, me and God. And so, yes, I think later we're going to talk about the emotional center. And I would say that the devotion to God doesn't actually come from awareness, from consciousness itself. There can be a realization, but devotion itself to me is a reverberation in the emotional center, in our emotional center. And this manifests as an emotion, in a very fine emotion. We used to call them religious emotions. And one form this takes is devotion. And this can be powerful. It's sort of like, let's say you want to climb to the top of the mountain. And in this analogy, of course, at the top of the mountain, the very leaping off the top is leaping into awareness, but you have to get to the top of the mountain. So you throw your rope, you throw it up there, and you put a stake at the top of the mountain to pull yourself up so you get up there. And to me, this devotion is like that. This emotion, very deep, can feel very personal, rich, insightful, very helpful. Nothing, of course, nothing wrong with it. Very good things about it. And yet you're just meant it helps you, it helps awareness get out of identification and preoccupation with me and get to a higher place in your being before it can become free, become completely free of the person, which includes the person feeling devout, feeling this devotion. And this can be nuanced because this is very much wedded to the feeling of I. And it seems quite valid. And what's interesting is in its own way, it is on its own level. It is very valid. It's perfectly valid. And yet there's more. We really do have to give up the feeling of the person completely. When I say we, I mean awareness, full transcendence. And so that's how to see that it's a limitation of I, of the feeling of I, or a limiting feeling of I, is just to understand there's more. There's more beyond that. What's your experience with this, Mihai?
Well, for me, I come from a background where somehow I had some subconscious issues with God, with the man-made God. And so I wasn't thinking much about God at all. And so my attention and interest and, let's say, dedication, love, commitment was going towards a spiritual path, a work, awareness. And only much later, in some kind of, let's say, altered state, it was revealed to me that what I just said just now, the way it was set up for me was all like almost there's no God, and feeling very comfortable with this. This is just reality, consciousness, awareness, but in a more like dry, unfeeling way, and more like abstract, philosophical, ideological. It was revealed to me in an altered state that had a heightened emotional state. That's a big limitation, and that underneath this was some kind of subconscious distrust, rejection of the idea of the divine, which was rooted in some childhood experiences, limiting, ignorant attitudes. And I, at the same time as I had this realization that it's almost I had a cap on my potential, because almost I was almost like an atheistic. I mean, I wasn't atheistic, but it felt like that. So I felt there's a cap on my potential, and I could sense in me there was a almost like a silent voice that would say that they don't trust you, don't trust you, and it was talking to it's almost towards Spirit Father, I know call it the Absolute, and it shocked me. And at the same time, there was an emotional realization that this is not true, that there is a, yeah, so I was having some kind of profound mystical experience that come somehow stayed with me. It changed me, where I see that I was hiding behind concepts of awareness or philosophy, and because the like of God was somehow too vulnerable or too scary or too something, and there was a cap on it. And at the same time, there was a sense of deep down underneath my devotion towards awareness was a deep love towards God and some kind of higher emotion that so for me it was helpful to go a little bit more into the wet realm of mystical and love, you know.
Mhm.
But I can see that, let's say somebody that's more emotionally centered or a different type, it can go mechanically in that wet realm, like the questioner that asked us, and that yeah sets up some kind of duality and a reaching and a it's something that is tortured in some way. it's not it's not arrived, resting, surrendered being.
I think too that what's interesting what you're saying about concepts, because we, how to say, my observation is there is a, if you want to call it a vibration or a realization, a depth of realization that is more profound and more sacred, and you could even say more holy than the highest emotion that we have as a human being in the emotional center. There's actually, so when you go beyond this emotional center, it doesn't mean now it's empty. It means it's even more,
Mhm.
but it's so rarefied and so it's untranslatable. The best that it can be translated by the four centers, and particularly by the emotional center, which is our most sensitive center, most receptive. It's this incredible receptor. And it can pick up on this. more rarefied energy, but it can't fully absorb it, be it. It's not consciousness itself, but it can sort of get a taste, get a touch. And then that feels very powerful. At the same time, though, this other awareness, higher consciousness is even more expansive, rich, inclusive. There's even a deeper understanding of, and understanding isn't even the word. It's a knowing of this, here it is, right here, all of this. It's a knowing that this phenomena is all an aspect of it, also in form. This is, we see it manifesting in multiple forms all around us all the time and inside ourselves. And then we're talking about really touching the source of that. That there's no way to explain that. Poets, mystics, writers, even musicians, artists have all tried to express it in different ways, but all inevitably having to do so through form. Here we come to the limitation. For all form, any form has a limitation when it comes to, because it itself is a manifestation of the source. It comes from somewhere, these manifestations in all these art forms and mystical forms and so on, even scientific forms. Somehow, somehow you have to intuit there's more, even more than the finest emotion.
And even that fine emotion, mystical emotion, or unconditional love, causeless love, or these emotions, rarefied emotions, yummy emotions, I like Francis Lucille, that these are the footprints of the invisible dancer on the snow.
Hmm.
So the footprints are those emotions, but these are not an aim in itself and a reality in their own. They are imprint of a invisible dancer, which is our true nature.
That's lovely.
Yeah. But I can take the previous question at another level, which somehow that helped me to solve certain traps. Uh, in the Indian tradition, there's the Jnani path and the Bhakti path, like the path of higher knowledge, of wisdom and awareness, the Jnani, and the path of devotion. So I guess the fourth way, Brahmanical, combines aspects and understandings of all ways. So it's almost the Jnani path is almost like the third way, higher understanding, higher reasoning. And the Bhakti, the devotion towards God, towards a guru, towards a past guru, towards a deity. Devotion, love, this is like a second way. Anyway, how I resolved it is that ultimately the devotion is another word for deep interest, which is another word for love. Deep interest, very, very interested. And actually my devotion, they meet. The devotion is also, it's towards truth. Truth of God is one and the same. And how I make it simple for me is like, hey man, I'm really devoted to God, and what that means practically is the evolutionary process. Practically, that's what it means. It's the being devoted to the work. That's the most practical devotion to God possible. Because without the work, we are dreaming about it in some ignorant limitation, and through the work we are making, as you said to me once, put the needle of the compass of the ship, put the needle on God, and then keep going. You are safe, no matter what waters you end up. Also, the other thing with, like, when you find the Buddha on the path, kill the Buddha. so you can resume your own Buddha nature. I look at it as almost sometimes this gold shadow projecting. Like find somebody, I found some mentor or I found a teacher, and I'm like, oh my God, he's so amazing. She's so amazing. So I can put this teacher or this person on a pedestal high above life and having these divine attributes, and somehow that's a goal projection. Somehow I don't see my inner potential and I put it out on them, and that's tricky, very tricky. And so to re-own it, or kind of not have now this out there that I'm ooh and ah, that's tricky. Yeah, as well as, the true teacher, enlightenment teacher, somehow, in my understanding, will try to disassemble this to be put on a pedestal. It's almost like it's pointing the student back to their own true nature, rather than in some reaching or imitation or something. Although, this being inspired by your teacher and touched, and that's a valid help on the path. Well, this sequels a little bit into the next question from the same person, I believe. Um, is a teacher necessary? And if so, until what point? Is a teacher really necessary? And if so, until what point? Teacher, we're talking about the evolutionary process, about awakening, liberation. What do you think?
The short answer to me is yes. There's many ways to look at this, especially considering the age we live in now, where there's so much knowledge available in so many different avenues, so many different practices, techniques, approaches, traditions available to learn from. And it's also that connects to another question: is there any value as opposed to any harm in mixing all these teachings and all these ideas and traditions? That's something else that would be interesting to talk about sometime. Because of this age we live in, everything is accessible. And so, you know, do you make a distinct meal, or do you just mix everything together and get even more nourishment from it? It's an interesting question. But back to the teacher: is a teacher necessary? Those two words, what is a teacher and what is necessary? And you say this is about the evolutionary process. It seems to me the most important aspect of a teacher relates to what you just said, that a teacher will point you back to your own true nature and not let you get caught up in the devotion aspect, even though that may play a role and have a purpose. But a teacher is a vehicle through which the consciousness in the so-called teacher can transmit something about consciousness itself to the consciousness in the vehicle of the student. So you have sort of four things going on. You have these two human beings, one called a teacher, one called a student, and in each there is consciousness or awareness. The idea is that in an advanced teacher, the awareness, the consciousness is cognizant of itself, knows that it is not this person. This person is the teacher playing this role of teacher, and that has value, but the awareness is not attached to it as a feeling of identity. It's strictly a vehicle. And a teacher is trying to transmit that to the student, through the student really themselves, to the consciousness in them. And this touches on the second part of the question: up until what point, perhaps? Well, That's also a very nuanced question. That can have many aspects to it. But I think in the simplest way, we could say, well, up until the point until where the consciousness in the student begins to cognize itself in exactly the same way as has been happening in the teacher. And now you could say the lesson is learned, or the lesson has been learned thoroughly enough that there is no longer a reliance on the teacher needing to remind the student that they are not who they appear to be. They are not who they would seem to be as a feeling of I. And a teacher trying continuously to inspire the awareness to recognize itself. You know, in the music world, for example, you have a teacher. You go and you study with someone to learn your instrument. If you're going to become a soloist, let's say, or a really, really professional musician, and then at some point you're capable of performing on your own, I guess is one way to say it. But many times people go back. They go back to someone to get a tune up. You know, even professional musicians, their technique gets a little undisciplined or relaxed or something, and they'll go and go back for a tune up. And so, is that true spiritually? It would seem it could be true if, depending on how well established consciousness is or not, it can be different in different people. How well is the consciousness established in terms of knowing itself, apart from the feeling of being the person? So those are my initial thoughts. I might have some more as you speak, Miha, but I'm interested to hear how you would answer this.
Yeah, so to the question, is a spiritual teacher needed and until what point? Yeah, for me, the answer is again yes. To me, it's obvious. Like if you want to learn to be a violinist or a tennis player or a master electrician or any skill that's somehow a little specialized, it is obvious to everybody that they need to go to somebody who has experience with that, experienced as mastery skill. So, like martial arts, you cannot learn it skillfully from books, yoga from books, from videos. It will be unsatisfactory, really. So, yeah, it is a teacher is really necessary. From this point of view, I find the awakening process as to be the ultimate martial arts.
Mhm.
Ultimate martial arts. So take that metaphor. I know that in the history of sages, and they are some people who woke up seemingly by themselves all the way. These are so rare that almost like we confirm the fact it's an exception. And also even then, there's idea that they've been guided in some other way or in between worlds. I believe that I'm sure that in the earlier stages, earlier middle stages, the teacher is extremely important, is more important than ever. When one is in the second state, in a sleep state, doesn't know, we don't know who we are, we don't know even what we are dealing with, we don't know how to, so it's like we're in a prison, asleep, not even realizing we're in a prison, not even realizing we are asleep. And the path is to escape the prison. So how is that going to go? So yes, a teacher is needed, and I tend to agree with you that a teacher becomes less needed as one has true, honest, one awoke to one's true nature to a good degree, and there is enough understanding of the path and enough skill and enough inner stability. I would say, in my experience, if I look, I definitely needed a teacher, and I And I had several teachers. I had many teachers. Some I never met in person and then really changed my life. I never met them. Some I met in person and spent a lot of time with them. And looking back, I can see that somehow where I made most jumps, or it was when I had the luck and fortune to interact or be with teachers. So this is, they had books, they had lectures, they had videos, but I went to see them. Uh, Somehow that was a powerful light that I turned to, and it helped. It helped a lot. In some, I still, honestly, humbly, although part of me believes that I don't need a teacher, I got this now. But another part of me believes, no, I do need a teacher. In a tantric tradition or in certain spiritual flavor of the path, it is said that the teacher, a realized teacher, like a realizer, it's called. It's which I guess I don't know will be man number 6 or 7 in the fourth way parlance. That's the highest help on the path, and whether we are aware of it or not, that's our deepest need. And actually, it will be good to realize that need, and in a deeper than way. And I realized that in some kind of altered deep state. I realized deep from within came an I. Yes, that I know it's an I, but there's a lot that said, I need you. I need. Basically, we need God. We need conscious realization of God the most than anything else. And we are not aware of it. That's what we need the most.
There's another side to this question, I believe, too, which is that let's say you're a young person, you're just living your life, you haven't encountered any spiritual influences yet. You feel a certain way about yourself. You have a feeling of identity, and it's quite elaborate, this feeling of identity, this feeling of I. Now you feel yourself drawn to something higher, to a teaching, to a teacher, to the idea of perhaps God, to the idea of perhaps of awakening or enlightenment, can take different forms. And then you now move in that direction. You get drawn, and you are drawn to and drawn by this influence and also this idea of something. Now your feeling of identity begins to change. It sort of transmutes, it morphs into the identity of being, let's call it a seeker. Before you were just this person, now your identity includes being a seeker. And that, you said, having an interest and having a focus in the work, and the more you pursue it, the more your identity begins to be filled with this idea of I am a seeker. And that's good, but at the same time, it's still the feeling of identity. It's still a feeling of I. Consciousness is not detached enough. It's still enmeshed in the feeling of I, feeling of being the person. Okay, so now you go even farther and you actually come into direct contact with someone you consider to be a teacher, who they at least have considerably more command of the knowledge of a particular way than you do. And so you see that you could benefit from their quote unquote teaching. At the same time, you may feel it, even though you can't see it clearly, you feel there's something about their being that's different, higher than you. Somehow you can't. We used to say you can't see, the lower cannot see the higher. You can't actually see someone's level of being if their so-called level of being is higher, because you can't see consciousness per se. And so, nevertheless, you now come into contact. Let's say you join an organization, you join a group, a school, you go on retreats, you whatever you do. And once again, your feeling of identity begins to change a little bit. It begins to morph. You now have, we could call it a relationship with a teacher. And this is useful,
And also,
but it's still,
practitioner.
pardon?
I'm a practitioner now.
I'm now a practitioner, but I am now a student
Mhm.
in relation to a teacher. So my feeling of myself is that I'm a student. I'm not the teacher. I'm a student. And so this is good. This is also useful, but many times people can get stuck there. And maybe it's right that they stay there. That's where they are. That's their level of being, and that's fine. That's a healthy thing. But it's also possible to get stuck in the feeling of being the student in relation to the teacher. And this is not awareness. This is not consciousness itself. This is still consciousness trapped, you could say, or identified with being the feeling of the person. So when I said earlier, up to what point, when the consciousness begins to realize itself more, to be established more in itself. And that means there's no longer a feeling of being a student. You're not wedded to that, attached to that. And your idea of the teacher has to do more with the consciousness in that teacher than in the teacher themselves, the person. This is a different thing now. This is a different, you could almost call it crossing a different threshold. And so when you continue to have a relationship with a teacher, let's say you wake up, you realize your true nature to a certain extent, whatever it is, a consciousness, awareness begins to establish itself independently of the body and mind of the four centers. Why not still have a relationship with a teacher if that's your proclivity and you feel that? As long as you don't fall back into the feeling of identity as a student in relation to a teacher. Now, I'm almost reluctant to be saying this because this is kind of a more advanced work. Because in the beginning, it is right to have a respectful, devout, admiring relationship to someone you want to learn from and someone who inspires you. And it's right to use that to your advantage. And not just selfishly, of course, but to benefit, to reap the benefits of that kind of relation. That's great. But it's sort of like what we were saying earlier. There's even more. There's more beyond that. There's more beyond the devout emotion. There is something more. There's something beyond this idea of a relationship, which involves two people. Two, it's still dualistic, you could say. Whereas it's possible to realize, for consciousness to realize that it is exactly the same as the consciousness in the teacher. This consciousness, this awareness that realizes itself in us is the same. And sometimes you can see this more clearly and understand this. We are each just like a corpuscle in the lung. We're just a little blood thing. The oxygen, the air that this little corpuscle is carrying is exactly the same. And this is where this idea of the teacher-student relationship kind of falls apart, or you could say merges. And I think it's even more right to say it merges. So this is a very interesting question, and people can come at it from different sides based on very different experiences and very different experiences over time.
Well, some other thoughts I have on this. Yeah, I mean, at this level of more advanced practitioner, so to say, the lines get blurry and Yeah, I heard this even in non-dual circles, like with Francis, and how he looks at his students and how he was looking at his teacher. That now it's more like, hey, we are friends, a friend on the path, and there's only one self, there's only one sage. The sage is reality, and now it's like friends. Also, with one of my teachers, she would periodically ask us to contemplate on the question. It's almost like a koan. You know, she had a name, and she would ask, who is her name? You know, like, who is Johnny? Let's say Johnny is the name of the teacher, or
Hmm.
Baba, this is the name of my teacher. And the question was, who is Johnny Baba? Who is Johnny Baba? So that was interesting question, and people will answer, and she will be like, okay. And I remember I contemplated with this, and I was like, yeah, you know, you are embodiment of consciousness, free being. And then she would ask us, and who are you? You know, who is the teacher and who are you? She just wanted to ask this question. And anyway, I answered her this some deep, wise, non-dual stuff. And she was like, yeah, well, let me know when you know that I'm you. It was like that. Yeah, let me know. She was a little,
It reminds me of I just heard this recently, and it's a reading of the Gospel of Thomas. And this, of course, comes from the Nag Hammadi Library, I think it's called. And there's a little episode in there where Jesus is recorded as saying to his disciples, okay, tell me
hmm,
who you think I am. Tell
uh,
me how you see me.
mhm,
What do you see when you see Jesus? Tell me, what am I to you? How do you? And then a couple of the different disciples, they say, yes, you are this embodiment of truth. You are this. I can't remember now. There was just a couple of them. And then one of the disciples says, to be honest, Master, I realize I can't describe what you really are, what you as consciousness really are. And if I remember correctly, I may be wrong, but if I remember correctly, at that moment, Jesus takes that disciple aside, pulls that disciple aside to have some private consultation with. Sort of, you get it.
mhm.
You get it. And now you're ready to hear more, kind of. And maybe that's what that you say she was saying is let me know
Yeah.
when I am you and you are me. Yes.
But you know, it's tricky here because it's a whole discussion. The teacher can be it can be extremely helpful, and the teacher can be at different levels of being. So for somebody on the beginner on the path, what we call in the fourth way, man number one, two, or three, a man number four who is not quite awake, is not awake, but he's focused on awakening and more balanced and more conscious. And a man number four can be a helpful guide for quite some time.
Hmm.
Now, a man number five who is partly awake, beginning of awakening, it can be a very good teacher for a man number four or man one, two, three, and so on. So it's like somebody more conscious and awake and experienced than myself. That's what helped me many times, save me, save me. You know, if you are enter a more serious, honest teacher-student relationship, that is not going to be just groovy and love and gratitude. It's going to evoke triggers, it's going to create distrust, it's going to create all kind of stuff. If it doesn't, it means that it's a little too nice, too polite, too doesn't get to where it needs to go. So I would sometimes be triggered and have objection and this not agree and be about to leave. I'm like, I don't know if this is the right teacher for me. I don't know if this is the right path for me. And what helped me was to narrow it down to be like, okay, the time I spend with this teacher, is it helpful for awakening for me? Has it, you know, do I sense that he or she is more conscious than me, more experienced than me? Is it helpful? And so if I get to yes, yes, it means that, okay, that's what matters here, you know? Because very easy to be spinning in triggers and all kind of eyes, and just because we're uncomfortable and we have been touched on a sensitive spot of our ego. But also there's this area of, okay, we can learn some teaching, we can learn some practices, we can learn some guide, some course correction, but at a higher level, it's some kind of osmosis in a way, some kind of this idea of transmission osmosis, and even having the teacher as a modeling, somebody who can be that. You have a chance to spend some time or see someone who is not identified with the feelings, who is feeling reality consciously, who is not shutting off their heart. You know, we see somebody modeling these things, and I think that has a certain powerful taste. In the Zen or non-dual tradition, there's this story that, you know, there's a student goes to a teacher, asks questions. Yeah, that's the first level. And there's a student who goes to a teacher to meditate together or something. And then there's a more advanced student, is like he comes to the teacher, he comes to the master, there's this story, and the attendant is like, oh, do you have a question? Yeah. Like, no, no. Oh, you want to meditate? You want to get the blessing? It's like, no. I mean, sure, but no. But so, well, why? What do you want then? Well, I would like to see how the master is tying their shoes. Which is like, hey, I want to see how an awakened being lives life, an awakened life. That is apparently very helpful on advanced stages of a student to see how the student chews their polenta, you know, or deals with an asshole in front of them, you know.
Mm.
But there's this element idea also that also all of these type of teachers that I discussed so far, these are helpful because they are earnest, genuine, integrous. There's a whole area of false guru, of fallen teacher, of a non-integrous teacher, which is very tricky. And so there's a whole discussion. I don't want to go into it, but yeah, one needs to also somehow verify to some degree the level of integrity, to resonate with the teacher, to make sure there are not huge scandals around money, sex, and all kind of stuff. Although one can, it's in the Philokalia, in the Christian sayings, and I have seen this, one can have a teacher who, let's say, is corrupt, or and one can still learn and grow from that teacher and learn a lot from that teacher. But also one can be taken into some loop, some cul-de-sacs and delusional stuckness forever too.
It makes me think too. It was Ouspensky, I think. He said quite simply, someone said, "What is a school?" And he said, "A school is a place where you learn something." It's that simple on the one hand. It's that simple. What is a teacher? A teacher is someone from whom you learn something, who presumably knows more than you do. And so you're in a position to learn from them. At the same time, in this spiritual arena, that all holds true. And yet, once again, there's more. And we're talking here about the question of identity and freedom from the feeling of identity. Consciousness no longer being tethered, embedded in this feeling of I. This is huge. And so you can reach a point where you feel, again, that going back to this idea of teachers, someone from whom you can learn something. If you feel you have learned everything you can learn from them, then maybe that's the point. You no longer need to have this relationship with them as a teacher. At the same time, at the same time, you can have a relationship to a teacher in a spiritual arena, spiritual atmosphere, and you're wrestling with yourself. You're wrestling with your own feeling of identity. And then you don't want to confront this. You don't want to see this. You don't want to accept responsibility for it. You can kind of indirectly blame the teacher and then say, well, I don't want to be with this teacher anymore. I'm leaving. And that's not the right reason, you might say, to leave. Now, if it's abusive or something like that, of course, that's valid, but without question. But at the same time, this work, the nature of this, the psychological nature of the work on the evolutionary path is such that you keep confronting your sense of identity in deeper and deeper levels and in different ways. And an integrous student will realize that and realize, oh, I've encountered this other thing and it hurts. I don't like seeing that. I don't want that. And the tendency is to deflect other things instead of seeing the source of it in oneself. And that, by virtue of seeing all that, that's how you transcend it. And so you're right, it can not be always pleasant. The truth hurts. And a good teacher is not afraid to tell you the truth and for the truth to hurt. But that's not the teacher's fault that it hurts. It's because you are still sensitive in those areas.
Yeah, the
And
ego.
if you're honest with yourself, you see that. And instead of overreacting, you use that as a point of observation about yourself. And so this is very tricky. It's more than just psychological work, like seeing a therapist and trying to understand your psychology. No, this is as good as it gets and as hard as it gets when it comes to learning and teaching.
Yeah,
Because a good teacher also can see where someone is relative to where their consciousness is relative to the idea of being the person
yeah,
and where they may be stuck, where it's going to hurt the most to detach that, to pull it out, to try to not, you can't just go to consciousness in someone and extract it from this body mind. But you can influence the body mind in such a way that it will begin to kind of loosen and release the consciousness. And then it realizes itself. A teacher can't do that for you. No teacher can make your awareness, the awareness in you, realize itself, oddly enough. Because if they could, it would be different. It would be it would be form. It's not form. But a good teacher can kind of pull things apart, cast light on things in such a way that then you'll begin to release.
and I experience different styles of teachers, and they are legitimately different styles, different configuration, different approach. Um, some teachers that I benefited a lot, and it was somehow comfortable, where the teacher will offer a certain teaching, guidelines, knowledge, pointers, area to investigate, methods, even create organized context where you meet, you ask questions, Q&A, meditation and all that. And then you're like, okay, nice to see you. I trust you. You're good. Or anything else is an illusion. Good luck. See you later. Maybe come, don't come, whatever you want. So there's this more like hands off. Hey, that's one approach. I really like that. There are others that you're more like a tight knit community that can range from a cult to a very healthy, tight knit community. So what I enjoyed, and also more recently, my current teacher, that it's not so hands off. Basically, she's almost touching, photographing, putting her finger, spiritual finger, on my weakness, on my sleep, on where I trick myself, or where I'm going against the path. And she is not hesitating to do that, although she knows that it's going to be a reaction and a freak out and kind of. So she does, or as Gurdjieff would say, it's my job to find the corn of on my student's toe and step on it, meaning some pass of the ego. And so that is for a more mature student, that is a blessing. That is very helpful. I welcome that. But however, it is hard. And one needs to have a strong, stable ego, solid ego, healthy, integrated, to take that, you know. Also, there are different levels of maturity at the level of the student.
Mhm.
So the level at some beginner student will come with all kind of projected needs, where subconsciously we want to get approval from the teacher, or to be seen, and validated and appreciated, to be seen our gifts, to feel safe, to receive a blessing, to be liked, to approved, to be.
To be recognized by our fellow students also as getting the attention and admiration of the teacher. And yes.
And these are just mommy, daddy, unresolved stuff, egoic tendencies that are legitimate, but this is for a true awakened teacher, or even somehow awakened teacher, the student to come with this kind of stuff, it's repelling. I mean, it's not interesting, So I think it's nice to come as a more mature and not try to get these needs met from the teacher. We may get these needs met, maybe, but the other stuff, or being shown where we are suffering and how we are doing it to ourselves and how to transcend that, that's higher blessing. It's a better use of the function of the teacher.
You're talking about two aspects also, because some teachers, their talent, you could say, is in evoking awareness. Indirectly, in different ways, indirectly evoking awareness in their students. They can't make awareness realize itself, but they can do things that evoke it. Like you said, watching how does the master tie his shoes? Something like that can actually evoke. You're with someone who's more conscious, let's say, and you watch how they react or what they do, or how they live their life, you say, and it can evoke awareness. And this can be non-destructive. The aim there is not to destroy the ego. The aim is to arouse awareness. And some teachers, they have a talent for this. And other teachers, and it's not either or necessarily, but just to describe the other side, is where they will poke and they will prod and they will press and they will irritate. They will go out of their way to challenge and confront the ego. But they know if they're like integrous, I guess is the word. They know that it's going to create a reaction, but they're not identified with that reaction that comes from the student, because they know why they're doing it. And they kind of need students, the kind of student who can respond to that sort of treatment.
Uh-huh.
Not everyone can. It doesn't mean they're weaker or less prepared. It also depends on people, their essence, the teacher. Everybody's different. And so some students do well and almost like the challenge of being pressed upon, being pushed, questioned, challenged, um, sort of put through the psychological ringer. And they're equipped for that and they're prepared for that, and that's their, for lack of a better word, you could say their fate. But so it's different for different people. And this goes back to the question, is a teacher necessary? Yes, and it also depends on you, and it depends on the kind of teacher.
Yeah, it seems like we are staying with this topic, so let's. I have one more thought,
Mm-hmm.
which is some function of the teacher is that they are, as I said, they're demonstrating, they are being certain understanding or certain quality. They are being that. It's very powerful. I remember that David Hawkins was talking about this story that when he was got deeper and deeper into some continuous surrendering and letting go of content as it arose, and he did that for an extended period of time, and he reached some kind of wall of fear and some kind of terror, and he felt pulling back, and somehow from there it was too intense, you know. This will sequel to maybe another episode. We are going to talk on fear, one of the next talks. What's really fear? What is fear? And you know. Okay, so and he was about to pull back, David Hawkins, and then he said that it came from within his field of consciousness, from a thought, a quotation that one of his past life teachers, a Zen master, said to him. There was this: all fear is an illusion. Walk through it no matter what. All fear is an illusion. Walk through it no matter what. And David Hawkins said that this came to him, and he felt that this is not just some quote from some book. That guy, his master, lived that. He did that. It was the seal of his being. So he could trust that. He could trust that with his life. So because of that encouragement and truth, he stepped into the fear and he did what the teacher said, because the teacher not just said it, but was it. So that is a powerful element. Or even a smaller level, you know, the teacher is authentic. It's just can be real. It's not fake. Can be sad, can be this. You know, that's unusual these days. So there's a transmission of that.
Also, we're now this story. I'm familiar with this story from David Hawkins in his books. He tells the story in more than one of his books. And now we're getting into, this is an area where there can become a lot of imagination. We have to be careful. But it's this idea of higher invisible help. And you could almost say in that moment that there actually was some kind of influence offering its assistance, its encouragement, very pointed encouragement that was just enough for the awareness in David Hawkins to let go, to stop holding on to the feeling of identity in the form of fear. So we can never discount this. And we can never discount this as a higher form of teaching influence. It's beyond description, beyond words. And yet, it's kind of naive to believe that, to conclude that we are just, that we exist in isolation, and even that we awaken in isolation. That's naive, that's short-sighted. That's a kind of a concept, really. And so,
Yeah, in the Beelzebub's tales, I mean, there's this cosmology of the absolute, out of compassion, sending into this dark corner of the universe, this earth, messengers, teachers with trying to raise the level of consciousness out of ignorance and all this torture by bringing higher teachings and help. And even in between worlds, they are like help. So it's a mysterious. It's beyond the mind. I, I trust it. It's true. Well, Peter, let's stop here. And I know we had some other questions.
For another time, yes. This is
And also, listeners here, if you have any topics of interest connected to awakening, fourth way, non-duality, true spiritual life, feel free to share here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihai.